There's a cave inside the Grand Canyon that the Smithsonian says never existed. In 1909, a newspaper claimed an explorer found it. Underground chambers over 1,000 feet long, mummies, strange artifacts, symbols nobody could read. Then it vanished. No photos, no records, nothing. Here's the part that gets me. The Hopi had already been talking about something living down there, long before that newspaper existed. 2 sources, 1 canyon, centuries apart. I'm Mr. Koo. Let's see if they're describing the same place. Before we touch the newspaper story at all, we need to start with the Hopi. Because their tradition came first, and it deserves to be understood on its own terms, not just as a footnote to somebody else's headline. The Hopi are a Native American nation in northern Arizona, and their oral history describes something most creation stories don't. Multiple worlds, one after another, each one ending and giving way to the next. This isn't a myth they tell for fun. It's treated as real history, carried carefully from generation to generation by Hopi elders, long before anthropologists ever wrote a word of it down. According to that tradition, the world we live in now isn't the first one. Earlier worlds ended in catastrophe, and each time, survivors found their way into the next world through a specific, physical place. The Hopi call it the Sipapu, a sacred opening where their ancestors emerged from beneath the earth into this one. And here's the detail that makes this different from most emergence myths around the world. The Hopi don't describe the Sipapu as some symbolic heaven. They describe it as an actual place, tied to actual geography, in northern Arizona. Before the ancestors reached the surface, the tradition says they weren't alone down there. The Hopi call them the ant people. And despite the name, this isn't about insects. They're remembered as intelligent beings, living in chambers under the earth, who understood that underground world in ways the ancestors didn't. During the catastrophes that ended the earlier worlds, the tradition says the ant people sheltered the Hopi ancestors, protected them until it was safe to come up. Some versions describe them as taller than an ordinary person. Some describe them as covered in hair. Almost every version agrees on one thing: they lived beneath the canyon. That's been part of Hopi memory for a very, very long time, long before anyone showed up with a newspaper. Now here's where it gets strange. April 5, 1909. Readers of the Arizona Gazette opened their morning paper to a headline claiming an explorer had found a hidden cave carved into the cliffs of the Grand Canyon, hundreds of feet above the Colorado River, only reachable by boat. The man's name, according to the article, G.E. Kincaid, supposedly working a government-sponsored expedition tied to the Smithsonian Institution. And what he claimed to find inside wasn't small. It was massive. According to the article, the cave held a central passage running for over 1,000 feet, with dozens of side chambers branching off it. Rooms full of preserved grain, pottery, copper tools, weapons, carved objects the article claimed didn't match anything known from ancient North America and, strangely, were compared to artistic styles more associated with Egypt or Asia. And then it got even stranger. Mummies seated upright, not laid flat, carefully wrapped, tucked into the chambers. Statues nearby. Walls covered in symbols nobody on the expedition could read. 4 days later, on April 9th, the Gazette ran a second story, doubling down, adding more detail about the layout and the artifacts. To readers in 1909, this sounded less like a rumor and more like an announcement that was about to rewrite American history. Then, nothing. No photographs of the chambers were ever published. No artifacts ever turned up in a museum. No scientific report followed. The expedition that supposedly made one of the biggest discoveries in American archaeology just vanished from the record. And that disappearance became just as strange as the cave itself. So naturally, researchers over the decades asked the obvious question: if this really happened, where's the paperwork? The article named Kincaid as the explorer and a Professor S.A. Jordan as the Smithsonian archaeologist overseeing the dig. A discovery that size should have field notes, correspondence, photographs, something. The Smithsonian's answer has been consistent for over a century. No record of G.E. Kincaid ever being employed by the institution. No record of an S.A. Jordan connected to any Grand Canyon expedition. No record of any artifacts matching the ones described. For a lot of historians, that settles it. Elaborate hoax, case closed. But it's a little more complicated than that. The newspaper itself definitely existed. Both the April 5th and April 9th editions are real, verified, sitting in archives today. Nobody's debating whether the articles were published. The debate is whether the events in them actually happened. And in the early 1900s, that's a genuinely murky line. Newspapers of that era ran sensational stories right alongside real reporting. But real archaeological discoveries were also routinely announced in newspapers first, before any formal academic paper followed. Being in print doesn't prove a discovery happened, but it doesn't automatically disprove one either. Here's a detail most people miss. Only 3 years before this story ran, the Antiquities Act of 1906 became federal law, giving the government direct authority over major archaeological finds on federal land. The Grand Canyon was already federally protected. Any major discovery there would have automatically fallen under federal oversight. Which means the Smithsonian reference in that article wasn't some random detail somebody made up for credibility. It made real institutional sense for the time, even if no expedition records have ever surfaced to back it up. So let's put both pieces side by side. A 1909 newspaper describes hidden chambers deep inside the Grand Canyon, filled with preserved remains and passages nobody had explored. The Hopi, generations before that newspaper ever existed, describe an underground world beneath that same canyon, home to beings who sheltered their ancestors long before the present age began. None of that proves the newspaper cave was real. It doesn't confirm a single artifact. But it raises a real question. Two completely unrelated sources, one printed in ink, one carried for centuries in memory, both pointing at the same stretch of earth. Is that a coincidence? Or did a newspaper reporter in 1909 stumble onto a story that already existed? And this part actually matters more than people realize. The Grand Canyon isn't just one big open valley you can see from the rim. It's riddled with cave systems, especially inside a layer called the Redwall Limestone. Some of those caves are only reachable by serious climbing or river expeditions. Huge sections have never been fully mapped, even with modern equipment. That doesn't prove Kincaid's cave is sitting in there somewhere, but it does mean there's nothing left to find is not actually a fair thing to say about the Grand Canyon. Not even today. In the year 2000, the Hopi Cultural Preservation Office issued a public statement about sacred sites inside the Grand Canyon. It didn't confirm the 1909 story. It didn't deny it either. What it asked for was simpler than that. Respect. A recognition that certain places inside that canyon are spiritually significant to a living culture and aren't something to go treasure hunting through. That's worth sitting with for a second. This isn't a dead civilization we're speculating about from a safe distance. The Hopi are here. Their traditions are still being lived, not just studied. So where does that leave the mystery? We've got 3 very different kinds of evidence here. A newspaper report with no surviving documentation. Real geology showing a canyon full of genuinely unexplored cave systems, and an oral tradition older than the newspaper by centuries, describing an underground world in almost the same location. None of them, on their own, settles anything. That's honestly how most real historical mysteries actually work. Not one smoking gun answer, just pieces that don't quite fit together cleanly yet. More than a century later, nobody's found Kincaid's cave. No museum has those artifacts. No expedition records ever turned up. But nobody's disproven the Hopi tradition either, because that was never a claim waiting to be proven in the first place. It's a memory. Carried longer than that newspaper has existed. Longer than the state of Arizona has existed. Maybe someday LiDAR scanning or better cave mapping finally settles what's really down there. Or maybe the answer was never something waiting to be discovered in a chamber at all. Maybe it was already being told by the people who knew that canyon first. I'm Mr. Koo. If this one got you thinking, there's more like it. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.